Welcome to the Distillers Institute Podcast. I'm your host, Anne Gigney. I'll speak with experienced distillery owners who have launched and grown their own distilling business, and we'll share their wins, their successes, their challenges, and find out just what it takes to make a great distilling business. Hey everyone, Anne Gigney from the Distillers Institute here. Today I'm joined by Cam Mackenzie, who's one of the co-founders of the amazing Four Pillars Distillery up there in the Yarra Valley, and we'll be talking to Cam a little bit about that, but also a little bit about his what he calls his gap year. Welcome, Cam.
Thank you, Anne. Lovely to be on the podcast. Great to see you again.
Indeed. Thanks for joining us. Look, there are many people in, I guess, in the distilling industry, particularly those who love gin world, who would be very familiar with Four Pillars and your good self. I'm just wondering if you could tell us a little bit about how Four Pillars came to be. So what that initial, that initial conversation was like between yourself and your co-founders.
Yeah, look, it was sort of a sidestep, to be honest. I'd worked in the wine industry for a very long time, starting in production and moving into more marketing and comms and commercial roles, and ended up more in sort of winery management. Stu, Gregor and I had been great mates for a very, very long time. Working in the wine industry, he had been based in Melbourne, but he moved back to Sydney in the early 2000s, I think, and set up Liquid Ideas, which was a PR comms business that specialised in food, booze, hospo, tourism. And he and I were initially having a bit of a discussion. I'd worn thin of the job I was in running a winery. I just wanted to do something different. I had a desire to run my own business. I had noticed that most of my mates in the wine industry, their white spirit of choice was gin. And it was certainly Stu and my white spirit of choice. We would catch up and have a couple of gin and tonics or martinis before things got silly. And it was just a bit of a thing. So we had a small discussion about tonic water, maybe doing a little tonic brand, but I was really keen to get my hands dirty again. Over time, I'd moved out of production and sitting behind a desk, and I was really keen to get back on the tools. And gin just seemed like a good way to do it. Tonic water, I'd need to have it made under contract at a factory, so I was back behind a desk. We didn't really think we'd get an ATO license, so we sort of mucked around a little bit there, but we started having that very long discussion and really preparing for it. But I got a little bit scared, to be honest, because I was quitting a job with a mortgage, a wife and 3 daughters, and daughters are very expensive little beings. Whereas Stu's had a very successful PR comms agency and he had his fallback. I really didn't have a fallback. So I was starting to talk more about, look, this can't be a folly. This has to be a proper business. And he suggested we sit down with Matt Jones, who was sort of a brand strategist, if you like, who was in Sydney, had some common clients with Stu. And he said, all right, well, let's build a strategic plan. We'll get Matt involved. Sat down and spent a couple of days with Matt in the Yarra around here, eating and drinking and talking about what we thought the opportunity was. And he wrote a really pretty informal strategic plan of what he thought the opportunities were, and said, I don't suppose you'd want a third partner because it sounds like fun. We kind of felt Matt would balance the more juvenile tendencies of Stuart and I pretty well. I wouldn't want to be in his shoes, but he was up for that challenge. And that's how the three of us came together, and how we really focused in on what Four Pillars was and what the opportunity was. Which is a sort of roundabout way of getting us through to launching in 2013. There was a lot of other things going on, obviously, but that's how the three of us got together, and that's, I think, how we sort of formulated a really interesting partnership. I used to say I made gin, Stu made noise, and that made sense. And that was sort of how we ran the business for 10 years very successfully.
So interesting. That's really interesting thing to pick up. What did that actual the sort of delineation of those roles, what did that actually look like on the ground once you guys got going?
It actually was easier than it sounds, because I was in the Yarra and the other 2 guys were based up in Sydney. So we weren't in an office together getting under each other's feet. And if it was a sort of Venn diagram, there was a little bit of crossover between the three roles. But essentially, we each had our own patch. And interestingly, we trusted each other very, very well. We had an agreement that there was no two versus one. It always had to be a unanimous agreement on anything from brand through to liquid. And it was very rare in 10 years that ever caused friction. Generally we were always on the same page, but I think having just such good open dialogue early and such a sort of respect for each other's roles, Stu and Nat couldn't turn on a still, I wouldn't know how to do that. And I wouldn't know really how to brief a designer, not to get the result that we ended up getting. And I certainly wouldn't be able to do the media releases and that natural born connection that Stu has with trade and with media. We had really distinct roles, but when we did come together, somehow made it very easy to be on the same page for most of the time. And it was a really unique trio that I think a lot of businesses are lacking one or two of those. There's a lot of great distillers out there that don't have a Stu and a Matt. And there's some fantastic marketers and strategists out there that probably don't have me. And I think for the three of us to get together early, big advantages really in being one of the first movers in that category. But it kind of, it just really worked. And I would say also part of that strategy Matt talked about on reflection was a lot of what we shouldn't do. Not so much what we should do. I think everyone gets very excited with what are we going to do? We're going to do this and we're going to do this and we're going to do this. But we set a language, a tone, and some weird guardrails very informally early. We didn't make London Dry Gin. Number one, the world didn't need another one made by three bald Australians, so are we going to innovate? How are we going to innovate? What does that look like? Don't make Australiana gin. Nothing wrong with that. That's in someone's wheelhouse. Just wasn't us. We wanted more modern Australia. Just make gin. Like there's enough room to innovate in a category that hasn't done much for 40 years. Don't make whiskey and rum and rye and well, you might want to, but resist the temptation. And it was those sorts of rules that just we informally set right at the start. But it's amazing that even 10 years in, we kept referring back to that to say, no, we just don't do that. Yes, it might be an opportunity, but that's just not us. This is us right here. And I think that really worked for Four Pillars.
And what did that early vision actually look like? Like what part of that early vision got you really excited about where you were heading?
I think one of the discussions we had very early on was we all very much understood cottage business, a craft business, and a craft business with scale. And they are all fantastic businesses, but which one do you want to be? And do you want to grow from one to another at some point? And we sort of loosely said a cottage business will sell farm gate and maybe its local town, and online. Great bit of business, manageable, small staff, small team, control your fate. The craft business is a bit bigger. It does that, but it probably has a bit more of an Eastern Seaboard, or at least an Australian footprint, retail and bars. Craft with scale, you're starting now to build your footprint, but control the quality of your product. And that would be the first to talk about Hermes or Aesop or someone like that is what he saw as a craft business with scale, but they have a great global footprint, and a brilliant luxury reputation. And we that resonated, I think, with all of us. So we very much started, I think, at a craft level at the back of a winery in Warrandyte, Rob Dolan's place. We had a 450 litre still, which is quite a big still, but we outgrew it pretty quick. We had a little space, but it was never going to be the final home for Four Pillars. That was always, let's get started, let's get some momentum, and then we'll just keep our eye out for the right place. And that right place turned up pretty much 12 months in on the main street of Healesville, where I live. Fantastic property, brilliant exposure, zoned well, But where we started was we concentrated on brand, on product, most definitely. we spent nearly 18 months on rare dry gin before I had the guts to release it. We took our time. We got the brand right. Stu was ready to go to make his noise and build trade connections. We had our distribution in place with James France and Vanguard. The blueprint was there, and we stuck to it very small investment. We had a bit of investment early from friends and family. It wasn't by luck. It was sort of reasonably well mapped out, and we weren't afraid. If I'm honest, well, I'm nearly going to swear. We weren't afraid to stuff it up. We had enough money in the bank to try some things that if they didn't work, they wouldn't bring us undone. But if they did work, we could scale without affecting the quality, like Bloody Shiraz. We could scale that fairly quickly without it affecting the quality. And I think they were smart moves. We made a lot of good decisions early.
So in terms of those good decisions then, Cam, what did the investment look like to transition from your original home to that bigger vision, I guess, that was that became Four Pillars at Yarra Valley? What did that actually look like, and how did you sort of manage the investment jump?
The investment jump was was really interesting. Again, I think Four Pillars is an interesting case study, but it probably is a finance person's worst nightmare because we didn't overthink it. In our mind, Four Pillars was a racehorse, and we sold 40% of the business before we launched to friends and family, ginvestors. Very clever. See what we did there? It was the only ginning word that we accepted. We rejected all the others, I think. We've just glitched. So we sold 40% to friends and family early on under the guise, basically, it's a racehorse. You're going to have a huge amount of fun. It might be black caviar, but it might be a donkey as well. But the only things we can guarantee you is it's a huge amount of fun. If it goes well, we'll do well. And if it goes badly, we're going to lose more money than you. But you are going to drink a lot of gin and you're going to have a lot of fun. Interestingly, early on, when we were looking for those investors, we got some heavy-hitting people on board who wanted to invest and asked some very strict questions about cash flow and burn rate of funds and growth and category, and we didn't know what we didn't know. And we were pretty well versed at this. We knew the category very well. We could see the opportunity. We'd had between us about 50 years experience in the booze industry. So we weren't coming into this completely fresh. But at the same time, we looked at some of those people and we said, I don't really want them on the phone every week looking for their, what was a pretty insignificant investment as it turns out to be. Whereas my mate, Scotty, didn't own a couch and he invested. He's done all right now. And he also turned out to be our hospitality manager for a decade and was a legend. But we kind of chose passive people quite deliberately because it allowed us to concentrate on the business really, really well. So that first round of investment got us going. That meant we could get a bespoke bottle, which was really important to us. We had our own bottle made. We didn't have to get an off-the-shelf bottle. I could get paid for a couple of years. If it was going to go broke, at least I could get 2 years out of this, which was important to me to actually have a business where I wasn't scrounging to make my role sustainable. I knew the money was there. I could just concentrate on these sorts of things. And we didn't have to do anything silly. I didn't have to run out and do private labels for supermarkets that might ultimately knock my brand off the shelf. We could concentrate on Four Pillars. We had beautiful photography done, brilliant campaigns in everything we did. It was beautifully curated, and we had the funding to do that. So that was step one. Step two is when the building in Healesville came up, and we didn't have enough money for that. So we actually bought that with our super funds, Stu, Matt, and I. We kept that separate. That was a bit terrifying for me because that was officially all my chips in the middle of the table. It wasn't just my job and my career and every cent I had on my mortgage. I was now putting my super fund on the line, which I wasn't overly thrilled about, but a very understanding wife at home who said, look, I think it'll work. We then went on a second round of funding. initially thinking if we could get 10 of our 20 guys back in to reinvest and get some new money into the business, I think that would be really good. But 18 of the 20 came back in because they were just having so much fun. They were loving it. They were the best brand ambassadors we could ever have had. We had really interesting people, as it turns out. Our accountant was one of them. We had the former head of Wine Australia was in there. We had a really good finance guy in there who acted as a little bit of a board for us in a way. Very informally, we could ring them and throw ideas at them. So that was the second round of funding to fit out Four Pillars, and that worked tremendously well. Then we had cash flow from a really popular cellar door, and that changed the finance of the business dramatically. And I'm probably waffling a bit, but in hindsight, things just worked very well for us based on an investor group that was highly skilled but very passive,
And
if that makes some sense.
how did you know what you needed? Like in terms of how much investment you were looking for from that group, what did that look like, and how were you sure that that was the right number?
We weren't sure that that was the right number. I think that we had a little bit of a rule of thumb, that Stu would be the first person to say, you figure out how much money you need and then double it. And that's probably what you need. And I tend to think the same way. So we did some rough forecasting that looked a bit like a bloodbath for 2 or 3 years. And we figured out we need about this, and then we added a bit more on top of it. But because we bought the building a year in, all of those numbers were out the door anyway. It was basically based on, well, we're putting this much money in. It's worth nothing. You can't value a business when you haven't traded a bottle. You can try to, but it was worth nothing. We weren't greedy with those investors either. They were putting money into nothing. And I'm so pleased it worked out for them. But at the time, it's very hard to value a business that isn't a business. So we just, I think, looked at how much do we need to pay Lee for a couple of years? What does our supply chain look like? Some very rough numbers. I don't think we overthought it. Well, it was actually a funny moment that just before I bought the still, and I had to pay 70% deposit to buy a Carl still back then. I'm not sure if they still do that. And I was taking all of this money off my mortgage to buy that still. And I was talking to Stu on the phone on a Friday afternoon. Stu had a reasonable lunch, it's fair to say. And I was having a moment of panic where I just said, I just don't think these numbers look good, Stu. And I'm worried I'm about to go into massive debt on something that I'm just not sure. And he said to me, right, I want you to write down these 3 words and then hang up the phone and order the still. And I don't want you to ring me back until you've ordered the still. Like, oh yeah. He said, write down ready, fire, aim, in that order. He said, you've got to stop looking at the numbers, stop aiming at the target, and now you just got to pull the trigger. Ready, fire, aim. Don't ring me again until you put still. So he hung up. I was angry because I just thought, oh my God, I bought the still that afternoon. I transferred the money over and I sent him a note. I texted him. I said, well, I hope you're right because I've just bought this still. And he texted back. He said, what did you do that for? I was only joking. I nearly had another heart attack on the back of that. But he was right. I think at times, if you have great faith in what you're doing, at some point you have to pull a trigger. And I needed that moment to just push my anxiety over the edge. Otherwise, I'd still be here today looking at it and staring at the numbers.
And 2013, 2014 was an interesting time in the industry in Australia anyway. It was also about when I joined the industry. I think, there were 50 or 60 distilleries in Australia at the time. So it was a gamble. It was a period of growth. So what was it like entering the industry with a bit of braveness, if that's a word, at a time when it was still just kind of taking off? What was that actually like?
I think it was as exhilarating as it was terrifying. We didn't fit in. We were wine guys moving into a spirit world. But in a way, at least we had a sensory background. We had good palates. We understood balance, flavor, aroma, texture. We understood how to make good gin. That much we were really confident that we could make a unique style of gin. It was exciting because you had people like Seb Costello at Bad Frankie really championing spirits. Obviously, Bill had done an amazing job with Lark. Sullivan's was making wave in whiskey. West Winds had done really well in gin, was doing their thing. Marksy had launched Melbourne Gin Company with just a fraction before us. So it was starting to get a bit of chatter around the place, And I think one of the things that Stu and I always laughed about was one of the first days we had in a trade in Melbourne. We've been used to walking around with bottles of wine and trying to flog wine. And a sommelier in the wine industry will happily look you in the eyes and tell you your kids are ugly. They are not backwards in coming forward. They will shred a wine, because there's so much wine out there, so much competition. We walked out with a bottle of gin and started showing bartenders a gin, and all they wanted to do was make us a drink and sort of show us their skills. And within a day of doing this, we figured that out. We just went, wow, that is fantastic, because we're going to drink a lot of cocktails, which was great, and some absolutely impeccable cocktails. But two, we can work with that. We can challenge the bartenders. We can really build that community of bartenders. And I think it was Matt who when we talked to him about it, he said, wow, it's really interesting. We've sort of written a story, but we're not the actors. That's the bartender. They add the theatre. And that very much started our bartender engagement program for us, and that we'd never done in the wine industry before, because wine was so judgy. They judge it straight away, whether they know anything about wine or they don't. Judge it and judge it and judge it. Whereas a bartender says, I can make something with that. I like that profile of citrus in that or the spice in that. And I'm going to garnish it differently, and I'm going to make it differently to that bar down the road. And I'm going to put my own spin on the story, which we just completely loved. So I found that really, really fun. I got to a point in wine where I found it, and I was working with a great winery at Giant Steps, best single vineyard wines in the region. And just still, I found sometimes some of these buyers and sommeliers were a bit of a drag. Oh, man. Bartenders never were. Bartenders just wanted to make a drink and ask me what I thought of it. It's like, this is unheard of. Like, this is crazy. So I totally loved that side of it. The absolute unparalleled, unpredictable growth in gin and in Four Pillars. There were days where it was a 14-hour day distilling. I didn't have a seat in the distillery back at Warrandyte. I didn't have a chair in there. We did not stop working. Recruiting a team was exciting. A lot of, very professional women that were ready to re-enter the workforce, and their kids were just going back to school, and they were happy to jump on the bottling line. And they were just unreal, exciting people who were happy to be part of this, and they're still great supporters of ours now. I just didn't anticipate that would be the case, that I've got these incredibly professional people on my bottling line that were turning up. We'd have lunch together. It was crazy. And purchase orders coming in and in. It was the most exciting experience I've ever had. Exhausting, terrifying. I sometimes say it was like running fast as you can down a hill, and it's exhilarating beyond belief, but you shouldn't be running that fast, and you could clip your heels at any time and just lose control. But we got there, we kept it going. I don't know how. I think I spoke to Stu and Nat almost every day of my life for 6 or 7 years while we recruited the team and grew. It was an amazing experience, and the industry is still, I think, in its infancy in Australia. A lot of players, but it's still got so much room to work.
Such a good story, Cam. Such a good story. So when you first started out and you've moved into that, into the venue, which is Four Pillars in the Yarra Valley, how big were you? So what was the size of your stills, or how much were you producing? Then how did you grow that team to support that?
Yeah, it's a great question. We had the 450 litre still, Wilma, named after my late mum. And then we bought Jude, which was a 600 litre Carl still, named after Stu's mum. Tourism for us was huge. From day one, I just thought we'd have a couple of trestle tables and serve a bit of gin and do some tastings. And then as we were sort of fitting out that area, we put in a glass washer. We might as well put in a bar. So we put in a little bar, and almost from day one, Friday, Saturday, Sunday were queues out the door, but we opened 7 days a week. And it gave us great cash flow to pay excise, because back then we had to pay excise every Monday, which I was a huge fan of, because I don't like using tax as cash flow. If you've got it, pay it. Don't hang on to it, because you learn bad habits. But back then you learned a great habit of just doing it. Online sales were huge for us. I think when we moved into that building, we were probably maybe 10 or 12,000 cases, 9 litre cases. We grew pretty rapidly from there to probably about 25, 30,000 cases. And then we got to a point where we really needed bigger stills to future-proof the business. We always bought a still ahead of when we needed it, because there's a long lead time for those Carl stills. So we had the guts and the money to the cash flow to do that. So the 2,000 litre still, weirdly, our third still was actually Eileen, a little 70 litre Carl pilot still, because I saw that opportunity in tourism to do masterclasses where you weren't just blending. We could load a still together and make gin together in 2 hours, 3 hours, and that was hugely popular. Then the big 2,000 litre stills over time. Recruiting a team was really interesting. Healesville's such a beautiful community, and I've worked out here for a very long time, so I kind of know where the bodies are buried. I found it very easy to build the team out here. I've never burnt a bridge out here. I've never had reason to burn a bridge out here. I kind of knew the people I wanted. So I would ring and sort of say to them, to Scotty in particular, who ran Hospo and built that Hospo business. He was running Giant Steps Innocent Bystanders hospitality operation. He and I had worked together years before. I just knew him as an A-grade human, and I ran to see if he knew someone who might want the role. And I just left it with him, and then he 2 days later turned up on my doorstep and said, "No, I want the role." I was like, I knew that's what I was really hoping for. And with him, he drew in a hospitality team because people loved working for him in hospo. So that worked incredibly well from a production point of view. Interestingly, a couple of the people that were on that bottling line decided they didn't want to go back to their vocation, and they stayed on the bottling line. And they stayed there for 10 years, as we grew bottling lines and built different bottling lines. Production team was always out of the wine industry. Ben Payton was absolutely fantastic. He was a winemaker out here who's still at Pillars, but he's got his own little wine brand. We've worked together a lot. Quite like wine guys in gin, because they've got that aromatic and balance profile with wine. It's the same for gin. And we just sort of built out the cellar from there. So I think within a community area, it was a real asset. Very loyal, very proud of it being in their community. They love recommending it and showing their friends. It was a very transparent process of, we want the town to want us. And we will chuck bottles into the Pony Club raffle, and we'll look after the, footy team. And we did things. Stu pointed out to me ages ago, part of the success for us and the such low staff turnover that we ever had was we were running the business we actually wanted to run. It's the one that as consultants or over time we advised people, this is how you should behave, but they very rarely did. But now we had to put up or shut up, because this was our opportunity. We did things that sometimes didn't make commercial sense. We would have fairly fun staff dinners and silly events and Christmas parties, and it was about going back to our team. We paid bonuses to our team, even casuals, that weren't in their contracts. We just liked the idea of shared success. And if someone did one shift a week for us, they got a little bonus at the end of the year that they weren't expecting. And it was a really beautiful way to behave, and the business was successful. So why wouldn't we do that? So I didn't find it hard to build a team, not in a community like this. I think you just be a good employer and just be a good human.
It's interesting, Cam. I had a chat with one of the founders of Stone and Wood quite recently, and I mean the approach is not dissimilar. They really back their people, and they're able to grow their business in a way that was really positive for the brand. Um, from a marketing point of view, I mean, employer of choice, of course, from the story you've just told. But what role did the marketing play in the sort of growth of that business and the growth of the reputation?
Oh, crucial, absolutely crucial. I think marketing, media, comms is all roped in together. We were a really beautifully curated brand. Matt set a language around the business and curated it along with Stu incredibly well. I nearly died when I saw the first photography invoice come through. It's like, in 15 years in the wine industry, I don't think I've spent that much on photography in the entire 15 years of the wine industry. But one of those photos must have generated over a decade, it would have generated $3 million worth of coverage if you were to look at the print value of that in publications and websites all around the world. Anson Smart, who was a Vogue photographer, did that. And we just curated that stuff really, really, really well. Our social media was beautifully curated, and it had a very personal human connection. The language around the posts is not to a faceless community. We wanted to connect with people, and we were really accessible founders. My phone numbers on the website, people would just ring us, and I loved that we were so accessible, and we remained that way right through. So that all sort of contributed to the marketing of it. We had I think getting the bottle right and getting the brand right for Rare Dry Gin set the platform to grow the other small batch things into really sizable things. So the marketing of it was absolutely crucial. No cut corners, no mates doing favors for us. We paid people a lot of money to do impeccably beautiful things. And then we made a lot of noise about that. I think trying to give a PR comms team and trying to give a marketing team stuff to market and stuff to talk about is really quite crucial. When we first won double gold in San Francisco for Rare Dry Gin, we were only maybe 4 months in. I was seriously doing cartwheels about that award because it meant we were gin. I was more worried about, do we actually fit into the category? Stu was doing cartwheels because he could probably get us on the front page of the newspaper or even on the news. And I don't know how many radio interviews I did. I don't know how much media that generated. But within 2 weeks of that, Dan Murphy's was ringing us saying, we're not just ranging you, we're going to put you on the front cover of our magazine because of that award. Now, I think it's one of the things that, talking to a lot of distillers, it's great to enter the IWSC and it's great to win awards, but you actually have to then invest in telling people about those awards, invest in telling people about your innovation. And without Stu and Matt, Four Pillars would be a really lovely little cottage business, be great business, fantastic business. I'd probably still be there, I'd probably still love it, but we wouldn't have gone on that huge, growth trajectory and crazy ride that we've been on. If you want to be a global brand or a national footprint, investment in your marketing and investment in PR and comms is just crucial, absolutely crucial. If I did one thing right, I think it's that I gave constantly Stu and Matt something to market and something to talk about, but we also had this fantastic conscience to say no. I made a gin once that I made a few that were shockers, absolute shockers, that I knew would not pass muster. But I used to love sending him up to Stu to wind him up a bit, the asparagus gin or something terrible, horrible. And I used to love winding him up. But I sent him a gin one day that I'd made. I really loved it. It was a really beautiful, well balanced, had a bit of bergamot, really cool. And he tasted it, and we jumped on a call like this. And he said, "Mate, it's really delicious, but you're kind of answering a question no one is asking." I said, "What do you mean?" And he said, "I hate to tell you this. It's a great gin that no one wants. No one wants that gin. It's a great gin and tonic gin, but we have a gin and tonic gin with rare dried. Probably make a beautiful martini, but you've got olive oil for the martini. And spiced Negroni for it. Like, yeah, you worry me a little bit here." And he said, I don't want to tell you it's a bad gin because it's not. It's a great gin, but it has no place just yet. So we're not going to release it." And I was totally fine with that. It made perfect sense to me to have a few recipes at the back of the book in case a gin club needed, which is exactly where it went. Went to a gin club eventually. He said, "Great recipe, keep doing it. Just keep doing it." And occasionally I'm just going to say no because the world just doesn't need it. Having that conscience was really important to us. And of course, not taking it personally if they didn't like a gin was great. And if I didn't like a label that they desired, they didn't take it personally. And if I didn't like the way Stu wanted to approach a certain release with trade or media, I would say that. And, we, like I said earlier, we weren't telling each other our kids were ugly if we didn't like something. We just had that really great relationship. And I think Stone and Wood, it's interesting you bring them up. They were great guys for us to chat to. And I know Brad and Janie, I haven't seen Janie for ages, but I saw Brad a few weeks ago down your way. And I think that they were very similar, the way they ran their business, to the way we ran their business, the way they treated people, and the way they liaised with each other was really crucial. And I think our whole team saw that. They saw that we could just have really honest conversations and feedback. I always talk about feedback. Feedback is a skill. It's a skill to give honest feedback, and it's a skill to accept feedback. And I think the three of us were actually really good at that with each other, and that encourages that across the business really, really nicely. And yeah, in a roundabout way, that marketing stuff, yeah, mate, crucial. You can't. I don't know how much we invested in it. Stu and Matt would say not enough, but I think we got it right, and it was worth every single cent. It's the most. If I start again doing something else, whether it's in or out of booze, that would be a heavy, heavy, heavy part of my investment.
It's such a good piece of advice, and it's certainly one of the ones we talk about a lot with our students. Often people are thinking about the marketing kind of way too late as well. So it's interesting that you're kind of pushing that as such an important pillar for your business.
It's an investment, and it's a hard one for people to get their head around because it's not like a piece of equipment that I could sell and get some of my money back. Marketing and brand and these things, the second you view that as an investment and a really smart investment, you start to unshackle yourself a bit and say, well, it's okay for me to get someone to do that and not get my sister-in-law who likes to draw to do the label.
Yeah. I hear what you're saying. Good points, mate. Good points.
Have you ever thought of starting your own craft distillery? At the Distillers Institute, we've got an online course packed with advice from the founders of the Distillers Institute for people wanting to reduce risk, save time and cost in opening a distillery. Go to thedistillersinstitute.com.
So Cam, have a talk to me about innovations. It's one of the things I know that, when people are talking about you in the industry, they're talking about the fact that you're able to be so innovative with your spirits. Bloody Shiraz Gin is the one that everybody talks about, right? It's so yummy and sexy. Why was that so important to you, and what did that bring to the brand?
I think innovation was was very much at the core from day one. It's something we talked about, that gin had been such a boring category for 40 years. It sat there as London dry gin really until probably Bombay Sapphire started to change a bit of their marketing, and then probably 10, like change of style, and both outstanding gins, beautiful gins. And then Hendrix kind of was the real game changer to drag people from vodka back to gin. I think vodka had jumped the shark a bit with really stupid flavours, and people weren't as enamoured by it. Maybe they still are now, and it's growing again, but whatever. But we looked at it and said, we've got room to move within the category and innovate. And we sort of left it at that, and then built the conscience of what does that look like, And I think the second gin we actually did was Navy Strength. We released Navy Strength before Bloody Shiraz. Navy Strength was because Sean Byrne and Nick Tessa and the guys at the Gin Palace rang and said, could we get rare dry gin, but at Navy Strength? I kind of went, yeah, but alcohol's such a fixative that at 58%, rare dry gin doesn't smell like anything, doesn't taste like anything. You actually need to dilute to get it at its best. If I thought it was a good gin at 58%, I would have bottled it at 58%, but I didn't. So, and they went, oh, that's a really good point. So could you make a Navy Strength gin? It's like, I'd love to make a Navy Strength then. So we sort of made a designated one, started to use those botanicals, and there was a real thirst for this. People wanted to see innovation from a brand that was growing. I'm like, wow, we really like that one. It's won some awards, so we must have a reasonable palate because we liked it before it won the awards. And bartenders were like, wow, it's winning these awards, and I was listing it before, and it's all good now. I'll try the Navy Strength. So it was a nice, easy sidestep. Pardon me, Bloody Shiraz, though, mate, I didn't see that coming, I must admit. I simply, Stu and I, and probably Matt, but Stu and I talked about a number of people asking us if we were going to release a slow gin. I was like, oh, do I have to make a slow gin? I think they're ghastly. The ones that were available at the time, they were all probably 5 years old, sitting on the shelf, oxidized, horrible, tasting like marzipan. I think I was beaten as a child with marzipan. I hate marzipan. It's like, no. And Stu was like, I'm the same, mate. I don't really get it. Like, it's full of sugar and acids, and, so we just kept, whatever. And then I'd say to people when they ask, well, which one do you drink and how do you drink it? And they would more often than not say, well, I don't drink it. I've just heard of it. Or I had an auntie in the UK that used to make it and it was really, really good. Or not enough for me to change the business model on your auntie's homemade slow gin. We were at a winery, little parcel of fruit came in that Rob Dolan was griping about because it was too small for him to process. So I kind of just flogged it from him without him knowing. Spent the afternoon dragging all these stems off. Just had the berries, rare dry gin over the top, soaked it for a few weeks, added more gin. Hey, presto. 600 bottles, no label, released on World Gin Day as Bloody Shiraz gin. No lather, just a plain old thing. It sold maybe over a couple of weeks. And we got great feedback on it. We really liked it because I didn't have to add sugar, it's natural colour. Yarra Shiraz, spicy and sort of Chinese vibe spice. Following year, I bought 2 tons, and cash was a bit light at the time. So we made it stretch, and Stu and Matt weren't thrilled because they said, you're going to be swimming in it for 2 years. And I was like, well, maybe, but we'll give it a go. I reckon it lasted 3 weeks. And by the time 10 years was up, we were 330 tons. We were doing more Shiraz out of the Yarra than any winery in the Yarra. And it was out of control. And obviously it created a category. It's about 50 or 60 great flavoured gins, which I love. I think it's a category Australia can own because they're not going to do that in the UK. The French are certainly not going to do it. Maybe the Americans will. I think it's such a wonderful opportunity, but it highlighted to us that particularly our mailing list and retailers and bars, they all loved this innovation. Like bartenders could full shot of gin, had colour and it had sweetness. Well, Tick, tick, tick. What can I make? Classic cocktail becomes a bloody cocktail. Punters were just drinking it over ice, squash tonic or soda with ginger ale. It's really versatile, And then it started this idea of innovation. It wasn't so much that we had a release calendar. It was more Stu and Matt just saying, just keep plugging away. What else do you want to do? Like, I'd be like, well, I want to go to Spain with the kids. And I don't have any money. So how would you feel about doing an innovation in Spain with a little distillery over there? Fantastic idea. Let's do Cousin Vera's gin. And we went to Madrid with Australian botanicals and used their botanicals and built this great gin. They came over here and made gin with us. And we ended up making gin in Spain, Sweden, Japan, India, the UK, such great little batches to keep people interested in our mailing list. Media and comms, there's always an excuse to go back out. Prousey, who took over my role, who's a legend, Sarah Prouse, has just done a collaboration with Loon Croissants using the butter that they do. She did this great distillation and fat wash. She's doing something over in New Zealand. Like, I love that we handed this over to someone who's as creative and wants to keep going. But from a business point of view, it was fantastic because we always had an excuse to go back to our mailing list, not with, a pricing special, but with something small that you're either going to love drinking or keep for your collection. Hopefully drink it. Collections, just drink it. There's always that relevant excuse. And we weren't pestering people. We genuinely had something nice to say. There's something interesting that people were into. So I think that innovation was the core, and I hope it continues. It might pull back a bit and be smaller mailing lists, cellar door things. I think retail is probably a little, they need to go through a phase of maybe just stability of core products, unless they're local or something like that. Maybe, I'm not too sure. But I think it's at the heart of it. I think every business should innovate. I look at other categories and think, when is brandy going to innovate? Brandy is, gosh, that's ripe to do something with.
I had the same discussion with Patrick Maguire. Patrick Maguire loves brandy and cognac and whatever. It's like, yeah, the market's not quite ready yet. Not quite ready. Not quite there. And we love our brandy or our apple brandy down here in Tasmania, for sure.
Yeah. But it's got to win over bartenders and consumers again.
So true.
Yes.
So true.
And I don't know how, but I find that really interesting that's those there are still categories out there in and out of blues that just maybe need a sidestep. I don't know. Yeah.
So, Cam, the big elephant in the room, Sail to Lion. How did that come about? And how did you decide that was something that you guys wanted to do?
Yeah, look, Stu, Matt and I probably have slightly different recollections of it. So forgive me if you hear another podcast that's different. But for me, it was really a case of, I think we got to a point in growth where there were a couple of roads we could take. We were profitable, we were growing, we had a great cellar door business, good mailing list, export market was ticking over, travel retail was good. It was a good business. And I think we got to maybe a fork in the road where we could either put a ceiling on our growth and just accept that as a great business, pay some dividends to people and whatever, or we could go back to the original idea of trying to create a global Australian-made spirit. That was the idea. And we, again, unanimously said, no, we should do that. And around about that time is when we started getting a few invitations to the dance. A little phone call here and there from a global business, the ones. I'm not sure what confidentiality I'm allowed to say or not, but everyone knows the usual players that are out there. And we thought, okay, well, I don't think the bank is going to give us any more money. I don't think the bank is going to believe. We'd borrowed some money as well as the investment anyway from our investors. Not much, but I don't think the bank was going to believe my 3-bedroom weatherboard house in Healesville was worth quite what I said it was worth. So I don't think they were going to give me any more money. So bank was out. It was probably time for a strategic partner. And we went and presented to some big global spirit companies and had those discussions. But what I found really interesting, again, we were all on the same page. There's one meeting in particular where we sort of fell into a taxi afterwards laughing. We went to the pub and had a couple of pints, and we were like, well, that's a no. Even though it would have been very lucrative, it would have been very good. We just got the sense out of the meeting that all they wanted to do was try and fix us. And we didn't feel we were broken. We were growing, we were profitable. I think sometimes these businesses are so used to dealing with a business that is desperate to sell or a business that is in distress and on the ropes that their language can change a little bit. And we weren't being arrogant or anything. We just presented a really healthy, growing, fantastic business that had an amazing footprint in Australia and a brilliant global reputation that didn't have the distribution to take advantage of that just yet. It had footprints, but being injected into a bigger portfolio, the upside for that business was, in my mind, in our mind, was huge because you had the global accolades sitting there. People just couldn't get the gin necessarily. So to hear that they sort of wanted to fix us and do things this, and why do you make marmalade? Well, we make marmalade because I don't want to throw all the oranges in the bin. And we also do 20,000 jars of marmalade a year. So actually kind of pays for more than the Christmas party. Like, why do you do gin pig dinners? Well, because they're fun and they sell out within an hour of going on our website, and it's about that brilliant engagement with our consumers. You know, you just got the sense that wasn't going to wash and that wasn't going to fly, and that was the fun part of the business that created Four Pillars. It was fun. It wasn't a stuffy business. It's still not a stuffy business. It's always been a fun. Cocktails are fun. You can have fun in a bar. You know, it's fun. It's innovative and it's fun. So while we were having those discussions, we kept ignoring James Brindley's phone call from Lion, thinking, oh, as a beer company, want to talk to us. And then finally, I think Stu had a chat to James and said, look, just come up and we'll have a chat. And he basically, over 3 schooners at the CBD hotel, said to the three of us, I just don't want to get in your way. I just want to invest in your business. Lion want to re-enter the spirits business. We used to distribute Bacardi many years ago, and they did a great job with Bacardi. We want to invest so you can grow. We form a board. You know, there's some checks and balances that your business probably should get used to anyway. And we'll go from there. And, you know, the investment was 50%. Initially, they wanted to buy out the investor group, but we said no, they have to stay in because they backed us when we were absolutely nothing, and we want to keep them along for this ride. Much more lucrative to do it the other way around, but we said no, we really want them to stay in, which they were very, very thankful for, and Lion was very accepting of and said, yep, okay, that's fine. And that was the deal that we did. You know, they invested in doubling the size of Healesville, which was great, invested in our export markets. And it was a really interesting time because pretty much almost 12 and a bit months in, COVID hit. And that was just a disaster for obviously everyone. But that gave us an enormous sense of comfort that we'd done the first part of that deal with Lion because our team suddenly felt secure. Lion made it very, you know, they're pretty hands-off, to be honest. You know, call us if you need us kind of thing. And the board was pretty relaxed. You know, we were growing and making our numbers, but there was not a lot to worry about there. Not as much leaning on each other as I would have liked. I would have liked a bit more procurement efficiencies, and they weren't distributing spirits, so we weren't going to do a deal there. They bought Vanguard, our distributor, which is kind of how partly that conversation started. But through COVID, one of the things that James said, and James Brindley, I have to say, is just a legend. He's one of the great blokes of the booze industry. I don't know how long he's been at Lion, probably 30 years, but he's a relationships guy. And that was one of the things he really emphasised was look after your people, call me if you need me, but prioritise people and prioritise your relationships because you're going to need them all when this thing is over. And he was 100% correct. We did that. We were a hand sanitizer business for a few months, but it kept our hospo team working. And when we reopened after lockdowns in Melbourne, I had a full ticket of staff at the distillery. Half the venues were closed or could open maybe 2 days a week. We opened 7 days a week with a full ticket of staff. Our supply lines were good, ready to go again. We didn't have it took forever to recover like it did for everyone, but we were in such a good place for that. So that sort of explained that first part of the investment. And the second part of the investment, it was just the right time, to buy the whole thing. The three of us were still great mates. We still got on well together. We had outgrown our co-CEO model. That just wasn't going to work anymore. It was the right time to do that for all of us. And it was very amicable. There was no put and call option or anything like that. It was all very good. There's always teething issues with those sorts of things. But by and large, it was an incredible experience, stressful at times, but really, really an incredible experience. And I hope Lion continue with that idea of building a proper Australian spirits portfolio. They had Vanguard, they've got Four Pillars, they've got Four Roses and now Fuji from a global level through Kieran. The pieces of the puzzle are there, and I hope they continue to invest in it. Because right back to the start of this discussion, I think Australian spirits are still in their infancy. You walk into any retail shop, Dan Murphy's or Coles or whoever, I guarantee you 85 to 90% of the wine is Australian and 10% is imported. And the spirit shelf is the exact opposite. And that just shouldn't be. We are making world-class everything here. We've got to be more parochial. And we've got to build that industry. And I hope Lion can take full advantage of that. I catch up with a lot of those guys. I'm still at the distillery twice a week, stealing coffee and walking out without paying the bill. So I'm all right. Still works.
What do you think that opportunity looks for Lion? Like if you were in their shoes, where would you be looking?
If I was in their shoes, I'd probably be looking at a whiskey, a Tassie whiskey, or a whiskey somewhere, that is something that can be scaled. They're not going to want to do it super small, but they're going to want to have something that can supply a national footprint. I think there's the opportunity on the back of Four Pillars International Network and travel retail to slide some of those brands in and get better coverage there. I think an Australian rum would be mad not to do an Australian rum, or at least have a good look at one. Liqueurs, I think, would be really interesting. Vodka, they've launched a vodka brand. I'm not sure how that is going, but I think it's really just a brand probably under contract. I think there's probably an opportunity for vodka to partner into one of their breweries and do that really well. I don't know if anyone at Lion will listen to this, but if it was me, I'd put a giant column down at Little Creatures in Geelong. And I think that's a beautiful play to do a fantastic vodka out of Little Creatures. Would be amazing, and they did some hop things, and I don't know. I think the opportunity to build a really cool Australian spirits portfolio with a couple of international players in there works really, really well for me. And I think there is a first for it in the Australian bar and retail community. There's just not, Kathleen Davies has done an amazing job with Nip of Courage, which she would have found it tough, I'm sure. Like, she's been a trailblazer trying to do that and do it pretty much on her own, championing Australia with spirits. Incredible job. But I think, someone like Lion has some critical mass that might be able to actually open doors for themselves and for other distributors, because we've got world-class stuff. It absolutely baffles me that we're not as parochial as we should be. So that, I think the opportunity is there, and that's the only way Lion would really disappoint me, is if they don't take that opportunity, because it's there. It's a great opportunity, and I think that is still the plan.
There you go, Cam Mackenzie. You heard it here first.
I'll probably get an irate phone call from someone.
I love it. Now, look, I've got a couple more questions for you. I'm just looking at my list here. International Gin Producer of the Year 3 times, 2019, 2020, 23. Master Distiller, UK Icons of Gin, Australian Distillers Hall of Fame, and so on, and so on, and so on. Do you feel proud of that? Is that important to you?
Oh, I'm very proud of it. Yeah, sure. I'm humbled by it, like I think most people are. It's um, it's not an important. I don't know. It's a weird. Is it important to me? It's a shining example of what happens when you surround yourself by great people who make you look good. And that's not just Stu and Matt, who endlessly made me look good. That is the team at the distillery, the marketing team, the brand team, the sales team. You know, if I was just that little cottage distillery at the back of Rob Dolan Wines, none of those things really. I probably wouldn't have entered those shows. So it is a reflection of how to build a great team. I think across all areas of our business. The recipe creation, great, but I always listened and got great feedback off those people, and that whole concept of repeatable excellence that Rare Dry Gin now is set in stone. The job for those guys is to make sure that it never changes, that the quality of tastes will change, judges will change. We go from winning a trophy to a bronze, sure, but your job is to make sure that is the gin. That's the target. Never missed it, ever. But it doesn't stop you from now taking on that innovation mantle. And I want the distillery to win exactly those accolades. I want to see Krause as, Master Distiller of the Year. She's a fantastic distiller and deserves it. I want to see more Australians do that. So is it important? Yeah, it's important, but it's not something my kids don't endlessly hang shit on me about. As they should.
Oh, I got to say, Cam, you're a little ridiculous with your humbleness. I love it. I love that about you. You help folks in the industry. I did hear that you have some crazy past Olympics kind of bizzo, which people must bring up all the time. You go, "Oh, that must be a whole other world away." Look, tell me a little bit about that. What that was? Must have been a
Yeah. Look, weirdly, someone said my wife said to me the other day, she said, "You've never fit in. You have never fit in." I said, "What do you mean I never fit in?" Well, I reckon I'm pretty good in a social scene. She said, No. She said, "When you were an athlete, I was a track and field athlete. It was a 400-meter row." She said, when you were an athlete, you were working the wine industry. Like, you just didn't fit in with the athletes because you were working in the booze industry, and you turn up to training having tasted 50 Chardonnays for the afternoon, and some training sessions, my legs were purple because I've been standing in ferments. It was just ridiculous. You just didn't fit in. But I didn't fit in the wine industry either because you were an athlete. So you weren't, drinking wine every night. You tasted a lot, but you sort of fit in there. Then you moved into gin and you didn't really fit in there because you're from the wine industry. I've always found that quite funny, but track and field was great. I did it very inadvertently. I was always a bit fast at school, but I was never very good. I wasn't in state championships or anything like that. I didn't do little outs. I just was fast. And when I left school, I studied hospitality management in Melbourne at RMIT. And my dad said to me one day, probably halfway through the first semester, he said, "You're kegging up a little bit. You're just spending a lot of time in the parlour. And I think you probably should just keep a bit fit. If you're going to do that, great. But that's an industry of hospitality is notorious for not a very healthy lifestyle. So you should get into the habit." So I joined a little running group down at Olympic Park with this coach, and he just found something in me. He just saw my technique and he said, "You're actually a really, really good sprinter, really nice. You've got a beautiful fluid motion. I really think you can improve if you apply yourself a little bit." And I did right through my early 20s as a 100, 200 runner. When I was 25, I decided I had one season of 400 meters, which was a horrible race. And I'd never really run them. And a year later, when I was 26, I managed to make the Olympic team in the relay to go to Atlanta and ran the 4x4. And then the next 4 years, and we made the semi-finals. We certainly weren't a household name, but it was just the most incredible experience, and I loved it. And I kind of got that taste where, I got to hang out with the world's best athletes. I trained with Kathy Freeman for 2 years, managed to travel the world with her for a season, which was insane. Did training sessions with Winfred Christie and Donovan Bailey, and the whole time I'm sleeping on a mate's couch in London, just trying to make ends meet. But I loved it. It was my backpacking time. It was my transient backpacking time. I just happened to be an athlete. And just before the Sydney Olympics is when I had been working in the winery out here in the Yarra Valley at Yarra Ridge. And someone who Foster's owned the winery and said, well, you can't make the Sydney team if you're doing all this physical winery work. So we better find you a cushy marketing job. So they effectively gave me to Stuart Gregor, who was their PR comms guy, as an assistant. And I've always said, if you put it on a graph, the day at which my booze career takes off and my athletic career plummets is the day I was introduced to him. And I missed the Sydney team only very narrowly. But I had a career in booze to go into in wine, which was something I can be just as passionate about and just as hardworking in. You learn a great work ethic, accountability. There's so much I learnt from being an athlete that I took for granted until I probably set up my business with Stu and Nat, about accountability and work ethic, all of those things. It's all true. And you form really great habits from that. But it was, again, I've never fit in. So now I don't want to fit in again for the next step. I've got to figure out what that side step is.
Brilliant. I love that. Cam Mackenzie, accidental Olympian, assistant to Stu Gregor, PR dude, winemaker, gin maker, business owner. I don't know. What is next? It's a good question. You kind of alluded to your gap year. What does, and I do know some things that you are doing that are kind of cool, but what's coming?
Look, I'm busy. I just said to you earlier, I'm president of the Spirits Victoria. It's a voluntary role, but trying to set Victoria, that association, up for ongoing success, which is great fun. I'm on a mental health board for men's mental fitness and fly fishing, called the Fly Program, up in the Snowies. Everyone should look that up, and every bloke should do it. It's a fantastic sort of 3-day program talking about mental fitness and why being outdoors is so good for you. And you just happen to learn a bit of fly fishing in the most beautiful part of the world. And if blokes out there, look it up on Instagram, the Fly Program. It's absolutely brilliant. So I've just joined that board. But I've also bought this little block of land that I'm sitting on at the moment in a little portable office. It's about 12 acres out here in Yarra, in Tarrawarra. And the idea for me at the moment is to regenerate this. It's just a paddock, but it's a really beautiful block. And I'd like to grow some native botanicals, some exotic botanicals. But my sidestep idea is sort of in essential oil with a view to fragrance. I've done the first 2 levels of a perfumery thing over in Grasse in France, at the Institute of Perfumery, and I'll do level 3 next year. And I really like the idea of a tiny sensory essential oil experience out here where you can walk this property and see all of these plants growing and understand what they kind of look like, and then come back and have a Four Pillars gin and tonic while we talk you through everything from the plant to the distillation to the oil. And maybe we'll make a few other things outside of that. But it's really kept me busy. It's been really fascinating. It is so much harder to brew than gin, I have to say. It is very, very difficult, and I'm loving it. And I think that's where I'll end up. And I don't know. That's kind of where my head's at the moment. And at the end of the day, if I'm catching a few more fish, I'm pretty happy. Just hanging out with my kids a bit more, who are now teenage girls. That's a treat. 3 teenage girls, I find I'm doing a lot more fishing. So it's easy, and it's really good, and it's really busy, and I'm very lucky. And I miss Four Pillars, but I'm there twice a week having coffee with everyone. It just was the right time to step out and hand that over to Prowsey and the team, who I speak to very regularly, and they still include me in a few messages here and there, which I really love, and I still feel very much a part of it. And they tolerate me turning up and interrupting masterclasses and tastings, and it's great. It's actually, it's good. I'm in a good part of the world.
I love it. Last 10 years, what's been your biggest challenge? What are you most proud of?
I think the biggest challenge, well, what I'm most proud of is the team we built at Four Pillars. I think that will be, for me, being a part of building a team like that was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. That was Hawthorn in the 80s. Just that unbeatable hospitality, production, finance, marketing brand was such a unique 100 people that, I still look back and go, I don't know how we did that. We attracted them because it was a great brand, good people who looked after each other. And I think for me, that's probably the thing I'm most proud of, and the biggest achievement was to grow so rapidly in 10 years, and so many people who stayed in that business for so long, and still, most of them are still there. Michelle Hall, I always talk about Shell. She started day one, half a day a week paying invoices. And she's now director of ops across the whole sort of spirits business for Lion. And she's an absolute gun and, such a great friend. But to see her develop in just always professional, always good. She's one of these mums, 3 kids, just wanted to come back into the workforce at her own pace. And she encouraged that for so much of the community, that we had so many sort of people coming back 2 or 3 days a week. I saw that as such a good opportunity. Why wouldn't we hire someone 2 days a week? We couldn't afford them 5 days, so it's great. And she championed our sustainability. She built a finance and an admin team and a logistics team. And it's the only reason I'm saying it was because of her. And there's probably another half a dozen people like that in the business that just, I don't know what they were going to do when they started, but they just really embraced the opportunity and grew with us. So I think that's probably the bit I'm most proud. The gin and the accolades and all of those things. We did what we set out to do, and we did it very, very well. But at the end of it all, it's absolutely nothing if you don't have a brilliant community and team of people around it. So I would always defer back to that. Yeah.
Biggest challenge, you reckon?
Biggest challenge. Matt wrote his book. I think if I write a book, it's going to be called A Recipe for Disaster, because we did everything wrong in a way. We went into an industry we didn't know. We built a category, gin in a wine region. Idiots. We took money from friends and family. Idiots. We were mates that went to work together. Idiots. Like, these are the things everyone tells you not to do. We did it despite 200 years of people failing at that. We kind of did it, and we did it our way. And I think that was the challenge, was keeping that communication, those lines of communication and that relationship open and understanding all the time. And it could have gone off the track, as so many businesses do, falling outs between owners and founders. And I don't think it was luck. I think it was designed to work from day one, because we got communication so good from day one that if you had a concern, you shared a concern. And that was it. And we dealt with it, and we fixed it, and we moved on. And it wasn't, no one held it against anyone. That was a challenge, but it was worth every bit of it for me. And growth is a challenge. You've got to keep up and maintain quality. That was probably a challenge, but again, we did it really, really well. So I'm not sure that answers it, but
Yeah, no, that's good. And
not killing stew. That's a challenge. Like, we're still mates. We're still super mates. We were down your way a couple of weeks ago with James Burris for our annual lunch, and I think that's something we should also be very proud of, is that there's no legal battles between founders and investors or anything like that. No.
that's wonderful. Wonderful. Now, I have one final question for you. This has been so fabulous. You've been so generous with your time.
You're right.
So I'm giving you a free pass here, and the free pass is to go and have a drink somewhere with somebody that you love to hang out with. Who is that? Where is that? And what are you drinking?
Outside of family, because I do love having a drink with my wife. And now that I've got a 19-year-old, my oldest daughter, I love having a drink with her. No, I would say it is with Stu Gregor and Sally Lewis, his wife Sal, and my wife and I. I would probably go. It would be a martini for me, an olive leaf gin martini, which I think is still the best of the martinis that I've had. Where would I go? Gosh, that's a great. As long as the four of us are there, it really wouldn't bother me where I went, to be honest, for that. Probably the back deck and just sit around and chat and talk. Like, it's company to me was always so important. We travel a lot, so we're very, very lucky. But yeah, the four of us, we're fortunate. We travel together, and a nice clean martini with a twist would be it. Yeah.
Okay, you've just defined what's great about life there.
Martinis with a twist.
Look, Cam, that has been brilliant. The list of roles, jobs, titles, or names we could call you from this conversation today is really long. I don't know. Working for Stu Gregor as the assistant's probably been my favourite one of the day.
I still don't know what we did. I don't even know what the job was, to be honest.
Oh, well, it was what it became, I guess.
A lot of fun.
There you go. Look, is there any parting advice you would give folks that are entering this industry or planning to open a distillery? What does that look like?
The advice is jump on the phone, and talk to people. Talk to me, talk to Stu, Matt, James Bryant. Talk to founders that have got it right, and talk to founders that have got it wrong. If there's plenty of them. Talk to Bill Lark. Bill's got amazing stories of the ultimate success and at times really difficult, transition of a business. It's not all beer and Skittles. You've got to roll your sleeves up. Don't let anyone put you off. If you've got an idea and you are adamant, be prepared to have it interrogated a bit and be challenged. But that doesn't mean it's not a good idea. It sometimes just means maybe it's not the best idea, or maybe it needs to change. I love anyone that has had a coach, a sporting coach. So the coach doesn't yell at you because he doesn't like you. Coach yells at you because he knows you can do better and the team will do better. Now, there's a way around that, sure, but it's at the end of the day, yelling isn't the point. It's the instruction and the advice on how to improve. So if you're looking to enter the business, I'd be doing your research, asking the questions and being prepared to have that interrogated, and you should openly ask for it to be interrogated. Plenty of people are going to tell you it's a great idea, but it's not their money and it's not their time. Ask for questions of what's wrong with my idea and be ready for that,
Right. Well, get advice, parting words from Cam Mackenzie. Thanks, Cam, today for sharing generously your experience and your fun little anecdotes about your relationships particularly. I've enjoyed those very much. And look, best of luck for the next bit. I love the sound of what you've got coming up. And all
What's wrong with it?
Yeah.
There you go.
Yeah. Very good.
No, thank you, Anne. It's been a real pleasure, and hopefully people get something out of that. And I'm very easy to find in Yarra, and I live across the road from Four Pillars. So if people are starting their, I hate the word journey, but if people are starting that journey, then try and find me, and I'm always happy to have a cup of coffee or a martini with a twist.
There you go. Thanks very much. We will catch you on the flip side, my friend.
We're getting some great iTunes reviews for those listening. Please pop over to your podcast app and leave us a review.